Good evening. I'll call the workshop session to order, and I'd like to welcome all our guests. Thank you for coming. First item is going to be discussion and presentation from WCID. Mr. Wilburn.
Madam Mayor, Council, City Staff, I'm Paul Wilburn. I represent the Lampasas County Water Control and Improvements District, WCID, and I thank you for the opportunity to talk to you this evening. I have put a staple together 4 pages in front of you, and the first page is not to invite you to an event that took place 20 months ago, but rather to show you in the theory that a picture's worth 1,000 words, that from time to time we have had deep water in downtown Lampasas. So the purpose of the Lampasas County WCID is the protection of the people of the city and county of Lampasas from flood hazards. I'll give you first a little bit of historic background, then I'll tell you a little bit about the challenges that are in front of us today and save room for as much time as y'all would like to take to ask me questions. The Lampasas County WCID is the local sponsor for operation and maintenance of 9 flood control dams upstream of Lampasas. Our co-sponsor is the Hill Country Soil and Water Conservation District. A watershed work plan was developed between those 2 local sponsors and the Soil Conservation Service of the USDA, now known as Natural Resource Conservation Service, or NRCS, and that plan was signed in April of '57, less than 30 days before the last major flood that affected downtown Lampasas. Prior to that flood, there were 7 of historical proportion, and out of those 8, there has been some significant loss of life and even more significant property damage over the years. After the flood of May of '57, the local sponsors and the Soil Conservation Service, following their work plan, developed and carried out the plans for the construction of 9 dams on the tributaries to Sulphur Creek. Those dams were completed by 1961, and from that point forward, as I said, there's been no major flooding in downtown Lampasas. So those structures have been critical to the protection of lives and property over that period of time. They were designed originally to have what is called in the paperwork a 50-year life. What I've learned really is that doesn't mean that the structure itself has a deterioration expected that renders it ineffective, but instead that what's in our world is known as the sediment pool could potentially fill by that time. And in the case of our 9 dams, what we observe is that has not happened. From 2014 to the present, the current board of the WCID was about the business of catching up on deferred maintenance on these dams. That deferred maintenance was primarily in the form of regrowth of brush and timber and deterioration of fences. In between 2014 and about this time last year, a total of $408,000 was spent in this effort. A little over $39,000 of that total was paid for by our local funds, with 368,846,000 of that, $368,846 out of that total paid for by the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board. That organization has been extremely helpful to us over these years, and each of these projects required the submission of a specific application to them for help, and they carried out their end of the bargain in a very good way. In that same period of time, the city of Lampasas and the county of Lampasas funded to the WCID a total of $39,000. So the vast majority of the money that was spent locally was funded from the city and the county, and we appreciate that very much. Flood control dams are rated in terms of hazard classification by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. A hazard classification pertains to the amount of property and lives protected downstream by each of those dams. When our dams were built originally, 3 of the 9 were built as high hazard dams. That is, they were rated that way because of the amount of lives and building improvements directly downstream from them. Those 3, if you look on your map, are numbers 5, 7, and 9, and they're the ones that are right, well, 2 of them, 7 and 9, are right in town, and 5 is this dam on Burleson Creek, directly upstream from what's now the Burleson Creek subdivision. The other 6 dams, which were classified as significant hazard, have now been upgraded by the TCEQ to high hazard because of development and population increase downstream. There is a requirement, not a mandate, but a requirement that those dams that were previously low or significant hazard, now high hazard, be upgraded physically, and the purpose of that upgrade, I have learned, is not so that the dam can retain a greater amount of flood water runoff, but rather so that the integrity of that dam is reinforced and the likelihood of its failure in the event of catastrophic rainfall is reduced. For example, one of the things that is most feared in this business about a flood control dam is what's called overtopping. As the name implies, that of course is floodwaters running over the middle of the dam, over the top of the dam, where erosion can start, and from there the process accelerates and the thing can fail. Each of these dams is built with a primary spillway, which is in effect a drawdown tube that maintains a full level of sediment storage and exits that water out through the base of the dam in a tube. They also have an emergency spillway, some on each end, that would let water run around the ends in the event of it before it goes over the top. But if that dam in its upgrade to high hazard standards would require addressing an overtopping, one of the ways that that's handled is by the development of a concrete spillway across the middle of the top of the dam. Okay, so there are several things that may be required in a high hazard upgrade, and they vary according to the engineering, the design and engineering that would take place on each one of those dams. Current day numbers estimate that those high hazard upgrades can cost from $3 to $12 million per site, you know, depending on what's found in hydrologic and hydraulic engineering work. About this time last year, the figures were that there were something just under 500 of dams in the state of Texas that needed this upgrade, and the estimated cost for that work was somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.5 billion. We have identified one of our 9 that we think is the most critical, and that's site number 6. You'll see on your map that site number 6 is the 4th in a series of dams down Donaldson Creek. We have submitted an application to the State Soil and Water Conservation Board for rehab and upgrade of that dam, and the program that this application runs through provides for funding from on the state level for all but 1.75% of the cost. So we've been in touch with and have had conversation with the flood control management and engineer at the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board, and he advises us that this project could well be in the $10 million range, and we might want to prepare for it to be in the $12 million range. Point being that our 1.75% local match requirement, if it's a $10 million project, is $175,000, which we all know in the big scheme of things is not a lot of money, but it's a whole lot of money if you don't have any. And so at the present time, the Wcid has in its bank account funds that are usable for this purpose that amount to just about $39,000. Earlier in this year, we submitted a letter to the city and the county and to all the local banks, and we contacted all the local insurance companies, making them aware of this challenge that's in front of us. There's been some discussion amongst those entities about this subject, but at the present, we don't have a firm commitment nailed down. Here's the rest of the story. When we made this application in April of last year, there had been allocated $150 million to the State Soil and Water Conservation Board for this rehab and upgrade projects. That money was used up, and we expected to hear in June of this year as to whether or not the legislature was going to pass funding for the 22-23 biennium. That legislation did not happen. And so at the present time, there's not money in that bucket for these projects. From our standpoint, that's bad and it's good. The bad part is we're not getting it done. The good part is we're kind of we're kind of off the hot seat. But of course, we do need to keep this matter in focus, because ultimately, while there's not a mandate that I'm aware of from TCEQ yet, and I don't see one on the horizon, this work does need to be done, and there may someday be such a mandate. Okay, I've done enough talking for the moment, and I would entertain any questions that you all have.
Mr. Wilburn, when do you actually expect the legislation to come back with the money to repair all the dams in Texas?
Last week, I attended the meeting of the Texas Association of Watershed Sponsors, and one of our speakers, Mr. Bednars, who's the chief flood control man at the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board, had to leave quickly to go to Austin to talk to the legislature about this subject. I haven't heard from him. That was last Thursday. I haven't heard from him since. The best I can do is give you a guess, and it's not particularly an educated guess, I'll admit. I don't think that there'll be money in those coffers for this project until the next biennium. In other words, not 22, 23, but thereafter.
Right. So at that point, we would want to come up with this money to pay our part.
Yes, ma'am. That is certainly my recommendation. I'll say this too. I mentioned the funding from the city and the county. Our local WCID does not have an ad valorem tax funding it. The law provides for WCIDs to have a tax, but it must be approved by the public, by a public referendum. Right. And there are water control improvement districts in the state that have passed that. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, if this one project requires us to come up with $200,000 for our part, and then the next one is X amount, and the next one is Y amount, and we still have maintenance work to do over time, I don't really look forward to being the person standing on the sidewalk campaigning for an ad valorem tax, but it's probably at some point a necessary thing.
Any other questions from council?
Yeah, Finley, we talked about this several times in our budget workshops in regards to trying to start setting some money back over maybe a 3-year period. Is that my recollection?
Correct. I think council was discussed a number of different options that would allow those funds to be built up over a period of years so it wouldn't impact us as much for 1 year. And certainly we would also want to consider what other partners might be out there in terms of the county or whomever else.
Sure. Did we put him back in the current budget?
We have $15,000 budgeted currently, and I think for the project scope that Mr. Wilburn is talking about, that needs to be probably doubled or tripled over the course of a couple, 3 years.
Right.
For our next budget, keep that in mind. We'll talk about it for the next.
And just as a point of reference as well, this is something that is on our CIP
Right.
plan. So it is scheduled on the plan, acknowledged, but not necessarily fully funded.
I certainly think if we can afford to try to fund it over the next 2 or 3 years, put some money back to be able to contribute from our perspective, we need to continue to do that rather than requiring him to go out on the sidewalk and start campaigning for a tax.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, sir?
Mr. Wilburn, I was wondering, have you already spoken with the county about this as well? Yes. Did you get any kind of feeling from them what they'd be able to maybe contribute down the road, or what you might be asking from the city? Because you told us what y'all have.
Well, their response, they were receptive to my talk and my request for consideration of money. They have not made a commitment for a specific amount, but one of the things that I find in my conversations with prospective donors, and I've mentioned the ones, city, county, banks, et cetera, I have had people that say, well, let's see what the other party's going to do. And I think that's kind of what I got from the county. My impression is that the county was kind of looking to the city to take the lead, but I did not consider that some kind of, the relationship today is, I don't consider adversarial. I think we all get along well.
And this would be going to Site 6, you said, wouldn't it? This would be for Site 6 upgrades?
Yes.
And then I know there's an effect that comes into the city there, but predominantly 5, 9, and 7 are what we have right around town. Right. So with these outlying sites that are more in the county, Are we seeing more of a need there because of development within the county or more development within the city? Upgrading them to the hazardous level?
I think it's, in the case of Site 6, I think it's within the city. And you know, one of the reasons for our choice on that dam, as I said earlier, is that you see it's the fourth in a series. It drains on its own about 10,000 acres. Site 1 on that map drains about 12,000 acres, and the other two drain 6,000 and 7,000 acres each. And so, you know, if you had the point being, of course, if you had a failure of any one of those three upstream, it'd put a pretty sizable load on that Site 6. And you can see, I apologize for the quality of the pictures of those dams there, of Site 6. The pictures of the dam that you have in there is aerial photographs of Site 6. The point of my getting to that is you can see that it's a monstrous structure. I mean, it's really something to see. Anyway, that.
On here, it doesn't look like there's any water behind it, but is there usually water retained, or is it just set up for it to catch it when it rains a lot?
That's an interesting question. Some of these sites, because of soils, I think, more than anything else, hold water, and some of them don't. That picture was taken at in a kind of a dry time, but that site does not hold water very well. There's Site 1 and 2 upstream from there do hold water quite well, but it'll be dry like that. It's not uncommon for it to be dry like that.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you so much for coming, sir. We appreciate all your knowledge.
Thank you very much for having us, and I hope I hadn't taken too much time.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. Thank you. Next, we'll have discussion and updates related to COVID-19 pandemic. Chief Smith.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. We continue the good news. We've been on a good trend here lately, and it continues. Currently, total number of cases for the state, 3,436,593. Lampasas County total, 2,937. Active cases in the state, 180,000. That's down significantly from where we were last time that we met. Here in the state today, new cases, 2,143, and fatalities recorded, only 2 for today. Only 2 fatalities recorded for today. There still seems to be some confusion as far as on the DSHS and the Public Health Region 7 fatalities for Lampasas County. One of them is at 59, so we've caught up, but the state still shows us at 60 for the fatalities for Lampasas County. Good news in here, 125 active cases for Lampasas County is what we show here. So hospitalizations in trauma service area, L, this is down also across the state, 9,719. This is down from 13,000 a couple of weeks ago. In trauma service area L, we've only got 125 COVID patients in the hospital. Adults in general beds, that's 91, 31 adults in ICU. Pediatric COVID patients, only 3, none are in the ICU at that. There have been 34 patients in the last 24 hours that have gone to the hospital. Let's see, public health, new COVID report. The cutoff for this is Thursday, like we said, 5 new cases. That was last Thursday at 5 o'clock. We'd only had 5 new cases in Lampasas County. So vaccinations, at least 1 shot, according to zip code, that's 76550. We've got 5,657. That number's only up a little bit. The big number for fully vaccinated is we're up to 4,859. That is a pretty significant increase there. Across the county, we're at 9,731. Fully vaccinated, we're at 8,376. Still the sad news to report, the demographics on fatalities, you're still at about 80% for the fatalities of being 50 years and older. Right. So that's a consistent number throughout, and that's week to week. That's not a total of the case. That is just from week to week of the fatalities that we do have in the state of Texas. 80% of them are 50 and over. So, last but not least, we are having a mobile vaccine clinic this Wednesday at the fire station again. It will be from 9 o'clock until 6 o'clock. I will tell you that the last time it was from 9 o'clock till 6 o'clock. They were done by 1 o'clock with 100 vaccinations. So don't put off if you're planning on going there and getting that done. Go early and get that taken care of. Again, this will be the Pfizer vaccine. This is a 2-dose requirement. It also, if you're getting a booster, if you're eligible for a booster, you can pick that up at that time. This is for ages 12 and older. If you're 12 to 17, you must come accompanied by a parent. And that's about it, unless anybody has any questions for me on this.
Any questions? Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Next item is discussion regarding the Hostess House design and construction specifications.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm going to apologize in advance. I've got the next 4 agenda items. Chris Eicher called me this afternoon as is under the weather, so I'll be pinch hitting for him on the Pavilion. What I want to discuss first with you is the proposal for design, professional design work for the Hostess House. Mr. Naylor was asked to submit this proposal. He was originally engaged on March 8th of 2021 to do the assessment as well as provide for additional function and accessibility for the Hostess House. He presented that on July 7th to council at our planning meeting. We, I believe, originally had not only for this project but for the other 2 Fund 40 projects, staff was directed in October of 2020 to seek proposals, and those came together at various paces depending on our ability to procure geotechnical services, survey services. We had to go through a staking process. We also spent a fair amount of time talking with stakeholders, staff, on these various projects. The proposal that you have in your packet, unfortunately, is a little confusing. It is a professional services procurement, and as a professional service, we cannot go out and bid based on dollars. We have to go out and bid we have to procure based on qualifications. So if you are a qualified professional service provider, we can negotiate directly with you for that service, similar to what we do with Eckerman and Associates or Jones Heroy on specific water, wastewater projects. Mr. Naylor did go through the RFQ process when we built the water and wastewater plant, and certainly I think based on the testimony we received from staff to council and to our CIP, he did an outstanding job on that. We have also received some additional requests for background related to renovation of existing buildings, historic work, and I've provided you at the dais some additional background on Mr. Naylor's qualifications. And he excluded any new construction. What he's got there is he has done a lot of work in the last several years on mid-century and plus, minus, in terms of renovation, as well as some specific projects that required some specific expertise in that regard, and those are noted in the handouts. The project has been discussed a number of times. Most recently, it was the subject of email update to council on August 13th, on September 22nd, and on October 1st. It was also part of my report on September 13th most recently. You received a memo on August 5th that related to not only this project but the other projects, and that it was subject of meetings that council had on August 9th and August 23rd. We hope that certainly council feels like they've been kept up to speed on the project through all those notifications. However, if you have not and have additional questions, we'd certainly be open for your comment and question. We'll do the best we can to answer that. I want to spend just a little bit of time and talk about some of the things that are within this contract, and there is one contradiction that we want to clarify that Mr. Naylor apologized about, but there is on page 21 of your council packet, there is a notation there that as part of the structural includes the production of as-built plans, and Anthony says we can't ask a contractor to bid on this project without as-built plans. It is included in here. However, in his standard exceptions, it says as-builts are excluded, but it's specifically noted here, and he said, we absolutely have to do that. We'll do that as part of the structural portion of this project and move on from there. Some of his, in what you're asked to consider is not his estimate of probable costs for construction. You're asked to consider his cost for design and for construction documents, bidding, as well as construction administration. So as it says on page 22 of your packet, they propose providing services for a flat fee of $32,070 for structural remediation design and $98,500 for the additional renovations at the hostess house. So the sum total of that is what you're asked to consider through Mr. Naylor's proposal for design work. It includes 3 construction visits per discipline: structural, Mr. Naylor, and MEP. The other thing that I would point out to you that a lot of these numbers, his intent was to over-explain so the numbers would roll into the big number, the not to exceed 98,000. There is a number in there for permitting. He is going to use that number because we don't require, we waive the fee. We do not waive the permitting requirement, but we waive the permitting fee. He may have some TDLR permitting fees that he'll have to do for accessibility. However, he's willing to roll that into whatever the cost of the geotech or survey would be as well. The cost for the design work represents slightly less than 10% of the estimated project, which we think, we've certainly seen it a little bit higher than that. I don't know that I've seen it a lot lower than that, but that's typically what you'll see if you see a sub 10%. And again, we're hopeful that once the plans and specifications are put together and we get the project bid, that we would be able to hopefully see some savings. I hope some of his estimates are high based on the market as it was several months ago as opposed to today, but who knows in that regard. I would be happy to answer any questions related to Mr. Naylor's proposal for design work.
I've got a question, Finley. How old is the hostess house? When was it initially established?
Early 30s.
Early 30s.
Right.
Okay.
And I don't know whether there's, where's Vicki? Do you remember what that plaque says? I think they initiated it in 31 or 32 and began to use it within a year or two after that.
Okay. And do we consider that a historical?
We consider
time
that
period?
I think the correct term is we consider it a building with a historical significance.
Okay.
And I think the one thing that we would want to preface, if you want to do an historic preservation project for the hostess house, you're probably going to have to remove a lot of things. You may have to remove all the railing to get it back to the way it was. You may have to replace windows. So there may be a lot that, if you're doing a historic preservation project, the cost goes up significantly because you've got to follow all those details. This is certainly, with the understanding this is a renovation of a historically significant building. And I think the other thing I would point to is how Antonio scoped this. In the scope is generally on page 22, hostess house addition and renovation. So for example, all of the upgrades in terms of code as well as accessibility and food service that council agreed to. The structural would allow the removal of every other column, which is something we had talked about, I believe, as council as we sat in the room and tried to peer around each other. The addition would be wood frame structure to match existing, stone veneer to match existing. That is a veneer stone on that building. It's not block, so it would match that. Metal roof with wood truss framing to match existing. So that, again, we're not going back and trying to source the exact rock, but we're going to get rock to match. It's going to the roof lines will match, et cetera. If that roundabout way of answering your question.
Yeah. Let me ask you one more question. Is this our architect? Is he our only source that we've taken a look at and got pricing? Typically when we do a job, we kind of look at several different, quotes, people that have done this type of project or not done this type of project and that type of thing. Have we looked at anybody else?
We of course, statutorily, we can't choose one based on price.
Right.
But we can choose one based on qualification. Based on Mr. Naylor's performance for a previous city project, which he did submit and we did score, as well as his background from work he has done, we considered him qualified, and I think that was council's take on it in March when they asked him to go ahead and do it. And I guess to answer your question further, if council wanted to go through the RFQ process, you certainly could.
Okay.
You always have that option, but I think as of October, when we began to start talking about this with council, I think they felt comfortable with Mr. Naylor's background and experience.
Okay.
Well, I would think that he's exposed himself with his prices already, so I would not think that we would go back through the RFP process, to be fair to Mr. Naylor.
Okay.
No, you couldn't.
I do have two quick questions. One, this does not have to be submitted to the Historical Commission, right?
No, that is my understanding, but we'll verify that.
Okay. And do you know of the references he's listed in here, which one of these are historical buildings or?
So what you have, the first 4 pages represent 4 projects that were specifically historic. More along the historic preservation where they, for example, removed paint to get it back to the original stone look, where they saved certain architectural features of one deal, where they went in to renovate the Elizabeth Ney Museum, and albeit not necessarily a structural renovation, but they had to make renovations to that museum in Austin that would not conflict with its historic character.
Does he submit copies of his subcontractors, in other words, his engineering firm he's working with?
Correct.
For structural?
By the way, we have worked with his MEP. His MEP actually did the work on this building. And again,
That's mechanical, but
yes.
mechanical, electrical. but
MEPs. The structural is a new structural, but the structural comes with the architect in a lot of cases, but we feel comfortable with his initial assessment.
Just have a quick question. So, Finley, when it comes down to basically what we're talking about here, it's about $130K for him to come and tell us what he's going to do and actually put
Correct.
And that's not, in your experience, not too crazy?
Unfortunately, it is not. And again,
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, I'll repeat it. So the question was, is $130,000 a lot of money to pay for this type of service? And it is a lot of money, but I think if you look at percentage-wise, it's not terrible. I don't know if Mr. Pierce can speak to that.
No, I don't think it's a lot of money on that scope of project. I mean, like Finley said, it's a lot of money, but there's a lot of detail that goes in on a project like that. and it's got to get, we got to be right.
What, I'm sorry, are you through? I don't want to interrupt.
Yes, sir. No, we're good.
Can you explain to me the design development? What's he calling that? Design development?
I think the design development,
Is that actual structural drawings?
I think that's just the development of the, probably all of your schedules, the exact
Is he
layout.
going to be providing structural design documents for this project in this $130,000?
Correct. It's $32,070 is the structural.
For the design of the structural?
Correct, the design of the structural, correct.
Okay.
So while we're talking about the design, has anyone got any comments about what we, as a council, had picked? Which design we had decided would best suit the needs of the hostess house, or the kitchen, which is the number 2, and the, don't see
Improved
it.
function, I think, was the classification. So
Yeah.
based on our conversations, and again, this was over several meetings, I think the consensus of council was the improved function, which would allow for some bathrooms upstairs as well as down, elevator. It would require a bump out on the east side. And just to get in Councilmember Clark, I know will ask this question next, but we did daylight that main over there.
You did?
Yes.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah, we did daylight that main over there. We located it, but then we went ahead and took the next step and daylighted, took pictures of that and sent that over. We should be okay, but
And
at
how,
least we know where
do
it
you know how far away from it is?
is. Because the main and the building are at slightly different angles. At one point, it was 56, 57 feet, and another point, it was probably 65 feet. I'll double check that, but.
We can isolate that section just in case.
Right.
Okay.
Mr. Naylor felt like it was probably going to be fine, but like I said, we took the
Well, I'm
additional
just-
step at daylighting it.
That's a 16-inch, I think, that goes
Yes,
under
sir.
the creek?
Yes, sir.
So that's a lot of water. I'd feel more comfortable knowing that we can isolate it.
Yep. It'd make quite a big fountain if we were to nick it. Any other questions?
This is the perfect time to ask if you have anything. Thank you, Finley.
One more question. Go ahead. Are we dead set on this plan right here? I mean, have we approved it or not approved it?
Council has approved it.
Okay.
Mayor, if I might, if you want to make a change, now is the time to do it. But again, over the course of 2 meetings, well, actually 3 meetings, July, August 9, August 23rd, we've kind of, at least staff took it as council's focus for that improved function and the number 2 kitchen option. But certainly staff would move in any direction council would so
What would you
chose.
change, Mr. Pierce? Which part?
Well, on this ground level, I'm not seeing the post drawn in here that's going through the middle of the hostess house.
The downstairs?
The downstairs on this ground
Well,
one level.
I think it might just not be on the picture, but he's talking about removing every other post.
Yeah, I understood that, but
It's just real hard with small drawings.
it is. I understand that. I understand that totally.
Any other,
And I didn't,
I'm sorry, wait 1 second, Kathy.
Councilmember Pierce, would you like me to do some follow-up regarding the posts?
Yeah, and possibly looking at some dimensions here, because, I mean, it's hard for me to understand if we don't have dimensions on what we have here, with their width, and then we have a bride room here and then this bump out here, and just, it would help me in my mind just to be a little bit more detailed with this. That's my opinion.
Sure. And I think Antonio could probably push a button and get that to
I
us.
bet he could too.
And then Ms. Keeney?
Yes, sir. I remember us deciding, because we kind of got interrupted because we didn't finish our council. You know, we had that workshop day and we were talking about all this stuff, and we haven't ever finished that. And so we got halfway through this, and we did talk about the kitchen, but we were still throwing around ideas about whether we wanted to actually, we never picked the upstairs or the back end part. We said, well, we could maybe bump it out, and we needed to look at the manhole, and well, we could do this and we could do that, but we never were firm on what we really wanted to do. And so, since this looks like it's pretty firm, but we didn't make that decision, it kind of worries me a little bit.
Because I
you have
agree
any-
that we
I'm
talked about,
sorry.
we talked about that second kitchen option, and I think everyone was in agreement there, but I think that there was still a little bit of discussion between scheme 1 and scheme 2 on, well, basically a $300,000 difference is one thing we were talking about, and then use differences too, with building out or bumping out those extra rooms, the mechanical rooms, and the elevator placement. I thought we were still talking about that, and we kind of had the same recollection there.
Does anyone else? Becky, do you have anything you can provide for us from that meeting? Okay.
And if it's okay, since we did, bring that up, and I know we never finished, we haven't rescheduled that yet, right? To finish up our workshop stuff?
That is a subject of my report, too, one of
Okay,
the items
okay.
there. I'm
Thank
trying to
you.
find, I've got some memos that I sent you, as well as presentations where I believe we had talked about referencing perhaps the improved function as well as the kitchen option number 2, but we'd have to pull that up. And certainly, whether you talked about it in a meeting and want to change your mind, that's council's prerogative. You can certainly do that. But we would want to do that in somewhat of short order.
Quickly rather than later.
Certainly, the estimates that we provided you in the packet on page 13, which were also part of a presentation that council received, I believe, on August 13. I'll double check the date. But it provides you with a balanced, the main floor plan improvements balance and the improved function 80 down there. So you have the scope costs with kitchen and soft cost estimates. But I think we did come back subsequently and did somewhat narrow it down. But certainly staff would go
Finley,
whichever direction.
I would propose, when we get to the item, maybe we'll discuss it a little more, but maybe they need some time to get it straight in their mind, and we need to do some research.
And certainly, I think the improved function, albeit it does come at a bigger price tag, but I think there's great value in that. So
For the
certainly,
square footage.
I don't know about getting straight in my mind. I think we're talking about the two different options here, and clearly on page 13, it shows the difference between the balance and the improved function on there.
correct.
I mean, really, it's not getting straight in my mind. It's where are we at as a council on there, because I don't think we voted on one of those two, or there wouldn't be that option there.
And so, are we able to make that decision right now, or do we need to make that decision, have some time to discuss it?
It's actually on the agenda as an item.
But I guess where I'm confused is how can we vote on it if we haven't decided which one we're going with?
So I'm hearing that you'd like to table this until a later date, until you've got more time to study it again?
I agree with that, Mayor. I want to make sure we get it right, because it is that's a southern gateway into our community, and I'd like to think about it a little bit more. I'm absolutely certain that that's what we need to do, but
Sure.
But I think it can be a hostess house that that when people come into our community, that it pops, and it leaves a lasting impression. And I just, I want to make sure that we get that correct, at least in my mind.
In the August 9th presentation that I gave council, we did narrow it down, and it was just the improved function kitchen option 2 plus structural for that estimated cost. So certainly staff got the impression that maybe at least you were leaning that way, perhaps more, but that was the discussion August 9th. But certainly we're open to any direction that you provide us.
Can it come back on the next council meeting, Finley?
Absolutely.
And at
You
that
do
point,
have-
if there are any questions that you need answered, let's get them out there before the next meeting, get them answered.
Do we shoot them to you, or do we shoot those questions to you or to Finley?
I'd prefer them to come to me. That way I can address them quickly with Antonio or however we need to.
Okay.
Were there any other comments? Next item, discussion regarding design documents and a contract from SPA Skateparks.
Mayor and Council, this item is on the agenda as part of the kind of the three or four projects, or 3 projects that we have been talking about over somewhat intensely over the last month. Again, the dates and times that I have provided you in terms of email updates and discussion, topics of meetings, as well as within my report, are the same for the Hostess House as they are the skate park. You do have some additional documents at your desk that provide you some example for the costs. One example from Sherman, Texas is on the order of $300,000. The other one from Leander is on the order of $400,000. Those, I don't know the date, although I think one of them is just now about done. So it should provide you with some perspective. And I think the comment I made to Mayor Pro Tem was, you're not buying a skate park out of a catalog. You're buying something that is custom designed for your terrain with the input of stakeholders, that provides for whatever drainage issues that you may require to be accommodated. Just quickly, I'll run through this. I guess a couple of things that I would want to reference. This has been reviewed and modified by staff and legal counsel. I got it, redlined it, gave my red line to JC. She, of course, does what she does and put a few more red lines and put check marks by mine and changed a couple of mine and provided that back. We sent that back to SPA Skateparks, and he had a couple of little non-substantive changes in my mind. We did take the $300,000 out. He said, the reason I put $300,000 in is because that's what your RFQ said. And he wanted to be consistent with what the language of the RFQ was in terms of the project budget. So the total cost of this, unless agreed to by both parties in writing, for the design and construction is the $300,000. A couple of milestones that we would point out, and then I want to point out a couple of things within the contract for your information. And the other thing, too, I would also point out, and probably as helpful as anything else, is Exhibit A, which is on page 47 of your packet, which tells you a little bit about what the process is. So part of that initial design is consultation. Design development includes 1 to 2 public input meetings. That's input with people, city staff, as well as hopefully some of the people in this room this evening to help come up with a Lampasas project that fits our terrain and features and arrangement. After that is agreed to, and only if agreed to, then we would move on to the next phase, which would be more of the construction documents and specifications. One thing I will mention to you on this project, as well as the Pavilion, our geotech called for about 4 feet of select fill, compacted select fill, which is going to drive that cost up. For example, for the Pavilion, that drove it up about 20 grand to go from 2 feet to 4 feet. Skateparks was selected based on scoring that was done. Proposals, we received direction to prepare proposals. The RFQs were scored on December 11th. The direction to proceed was provided by council on December 14th. The reason perhaps we're talking about this not quite a year later is it took time for geotech, it took time for staking, it took time for surveys, so there were a number of items that were precursors to actually the preparation of the design-build contract. A couple of things that I would want to point out, I've already told you about the different examples, but a couple of things that I would also point out to you within the contract. Subcontractors, I think there was a question regarding subcontractors related to design work, but they take full responsibility for if they use any subcontractors. The city would be required to get them power and water relatively short, which we shouldn't have any problem doing. There is a provision there if they come into hazardous substances and how they would deal with that. We did also ask, the term of this, the project timeline is 365 days. And we felt like that was pretty extended, so we actually demanded and they agreed to liquidated damages contract. The one thing you'll start to see in all force majeure clauses anymore is delays related to pandemic. So if you're waiting 4 months for a transformer or anything else, that's going to be a part of your standard language in the force majeure clause. The total not to exceed is included, $300,000 unless agreed to in writing by both parties. There will be, of course, progress payments. There is a 5% retainage. The city will have to contract with someone that can inspect this for us. Part of our responsibility under the design-build procurement section that the state allows us to utilize is that we have somebody that can do that, that can oversee that project. This isn't a street. We can't, we know what a water line, we can inspect that, but there is a gentleman that also did the inspection in Leander that is available to come up here.
There's also a gentleman that did the construction of the jail that's local, that's probably qualified.
If we could do something local and qualified, if they have experience, particularly in skate parks, that's what we would look for, or just concrete perhaps. But anyway, that was something that we would have to do. Payments and performance bonds, there is a 1-year warranty. The city owns all the documents that are prepared, and sometimes that isn't always the case. But the one thing that I want to also make sure is part of the design-build process is that if at some point you cannot agree with your contractor, the city has the authority, without any future repercussions, to terminate that contract. And obviously, we have to pay the contractor for the work he's done to date. But again, this is not a default. We wake up one morning, we don't like how the project's going, we can terminate with 15-day notice.
But this is a bonded project.
Correct. And it's funny, Councilmember Clark, because bonds are required for public facility or public works types of projects. So the question is this a rec project or it's not? But included in the contract is the requirement for payment and performance bonds. 15-day termination. There is also one item in here that we can terminate in the event that we get a huge spike in material costs. Exhibit A, as I suggested, is the scope of work, and the last thing I would say is that you're not buying a skate park out of a catalog or off a shelf. This is something that I think the The scope of services suggests is done with input from the people that'll be using the park, as well as the people that'll be maintaining it. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have a few right off the bat, if that's all right with the mayor.
Yes, go ahead, and if someone else wants to speak, maybe you will come back to you.
Sure. My first question is, I hate the last dot on item on page 47. It just kind of throws everything in together in defining their scope of work, that anything outside of that, and of course, we're going to have to be doing some landscaping once they're finished, probably, and that's also on the city. So I thought it was important to bring that up. So that's some additional cost that we may have to handle.
Sure.
Just as an example, some things that other communities have done is they put benches out, or they've done different sort of improvements in around the skate park. That is not included.
Well, obviously, for hotel motel tax funds, you know, it has to be a competitive type unit, something that would draw in people, hopefully, and create bedroom, you know, somebody using hotels, motels, and so on. And in looking at it, in your examples that you provided me tonight, the very first picture of this under the 300,000 shows all the elements that I saw in the Olympic structures in regards to going down the stair rails and steps and the different types of things. And so I'd be more comfortable in the $300,000 range than I would be the $400,000 that this cost has been bandied around, and I realize it has to be designed specifically for that geotechnical site. And one of the problems we've got is the field, but I also think we need to try to keep as close as we can to our original scope of work.
Sure. And one thing I will mention, and I hate to keep asking you to comment, Councilmember Pierce, but there is a value to scale. So in other words, you don't have to mobilize again. You know, you may want to consider a little bit more, because a little bit more is actually a fairly significant addition to what you're considering based on mobilization costs, expertise, et cetera. So the 300,000 example in Sherman, Texas, that was in Sherman, Texas. They may not have had to put in 4 feet of select fill, and so there are other issues that they may
Sure,
have.
I understand it could be 340, it could be 350, you know.
Or it could be 290 or 300 right
Sure.
on the button.
Anyone else have a comment or a question?
Yeah, I just want to clarify what the 18 and the 12,000's getting, what we're paying for there. And that is part of, that's not above the 300, correct? The 18 and the 12?
That is inclusive of the 300.
Okay, so the 18,000 is, how I'm reading this, is paying for the actual renderings, or them meeting with everybody, paying for the renderings, the base plans, the drawings, and the preliminary cost estimates. And then the 12,000 is for the structure after that, is that correct?
Construction documents, generally speaking.
Like blueprints and stuff?
Yes.
Okay.
Not necessarily blueprints. Nobody does blueprints anymore, but yes, the more precise design.
And that is all we're voting on tonight, those two, that dollar amount. We're not voting on a design.
Council will have
Oh, I understand that, yes.
Council will have go, no-go opportunities. Provided everything goes along and people accept certain stages, then we'll continue to move this project forward. If for some reason council feels like they need to terminate it, most likely because staff will come to you and say we need to terminate it. But it would be our hope, and we would think that if it was a fluid enough project, we could report to council, progress is going well, we're going to proceed.
So
And did we notice that we have weekly payments? If we get 2 weeks into it and we don't like it, we can stop the payment?
Yeah, I understand, but what we're committed to is 30,000?
Right. That's what we're going to vote
You
on
are
tonight.
committing to a design-build contract with termination clauses.
Which is 30,000.
No, you're not committing to 30,000. If
What
you
are
don't
you
agree,
asking us to commit to tonight?
if you agree to the initial scope, which is the renderings, drawings, the design, and for some reason you don't like that, you can stop right there. You can stop at 12,000 or for whatever amount of work they've done to that point. So you're not, and it's probably semantics, but you are not agreeing to a total dollar amount at a minimum risk. What you're agreeing to is a design-build contract that you can terminate at any time.
Okay, what is the dollar figure then? Which one?
The dollar figure of this contract is not to exceed 300,000. If you cannot agree, and there's specific language in,
Okay, so we're not approving not to exceed 18,000 on the construction documents, or 12,000? That's the way I read the original statement.
That will be what we vote on,
But not that amount, that's what he's saying.
not the 300.
No,
I would refer to,
I'm trying to understand it and get comfortable.
sure.
We're going to approve the proposed design-build agreement as discussed during workshop and allow the city manager to execute any related documents. So the design.
We're committing to 300,000, but we can say stop anytime.
Right. If that's
I would-
semantically.
I would rather do that. Now, there is specific language, not only in the termination clause, but also on page 31, the top of page 31. If at this stage of work, the city and the contractor cannot agree on either the final conceptual master plan design or preliminary cost estimate, then the city may elect to terminate the agreement without future liability or to contractor or its subcontractors. So that is in, starts with number 1 on page 30 of your packet. And then on the subsequent item number 2, plans and specifications. Upon acceptance and written approval of the plans and specifications by the city. So that's a no-go milestone right there. The city shall pay the contractor a total of $12,000. So you have to accept it at certain stages. The 18,000 is a step that you...
Is that the first step?
Yes, I believe so. So there's the project's conceptual master plan design, and then the plans and specifications is the second stage. So if you agree to what you see in the plans and specifications that's noted on page 31 under 2,
Right.
he's going to say, here's the budget for this project, this is what you're buying, and if you don't agree, then you stop. If you do agree, then you green light the project, and we spend up to an amount up to $300,000.
I've got a comment. I just learned this last night. On this skate park, I was probably much like all my other council members. Why in the world do we need a skate park? Why do we need to even think about this thing? Randy's not a skater. I don't think the mayor is going to go down there and skate, so we're not going to use it.
I'm not a skater, but I am interested in providing activities for younger.
Well, and that's exactly where I'm going. There's a why behind this with Marissa Skiles and the Wings of Eagles that she told me her story last night. She's been looking at this thing since 2005. And I've got to say, I'm excited that anything that we can do for our youth here in Lampasas, at-risk youth, youth in general, and speak into their lives, you know, I think it's a good thing, and it will be a good thing. And I didn't realize that at all, Marissa, and I want to thank you for providing leadership on this.
I see that there are quite a few people here. Does anyone want to speak for just a moment? Do you have something to tell us? No?
Come up.
Come to the microphone.
You'll do great.
Well, I don't really know what to say, but I've been working with youth for a long time now, and it's been a long work in progress, and I'm sure most of the community at a lot of points thought that this was not going to happen, and oh, she just gave up on it, but I never gave up on it. It was just that life happened, you know, for a lot of different reasons. I had to put it on the back burner, but it never veered from my heart. Wings of Eagles is not a skate park. It's an organization that provides resources for students, and one of the things that they need is a place to hang out. And I wanted to bring a skate park to Lampasas, because when they're at the skate park, we can go to them and, you know, use a skate park as another means to help them with whatever they need. And we're already doing that. We just don't have a skate park right now. But the students that are here, we have a skater that helps me with fundraising and ideas. He's my one of my go-to people, and then the students that are here, they come to our outreach meetings on Monday. And they're very involved with the community. We're always doing community service, and they come and do their schoolwork, and we help with job applications, and my volunteer, this is Abby, she's one of my volunteers, and we just build relationships with the students and get to know them, and the skate park is just a way to get more students. And we are going to have a location on the square, which isn't, the building is not mine, it's just being, I guess, loaned to us by the owner. So I don't really go public with that, although this is pretty public. Because it's her building, but anyways, we are gonna be down there on the square eventually, and that's gonna be a great vicinity within the skate park. So the students will be able to come to us within walking distance, and we'll be able to help them. So
And I think we can just say bless you to that building owner.
Marissa, can you give us a little bit of your background, what you're doing right now, your job? Talk about is it a 501 or 501c?
Oh, well, the outreach is a 501c3.
Okay.
What do you mean? We're nonprofit because I don't know, we're trying to save money. Well, okay, first of all, I started off as Wings of Eagles Skate Park, because I thought, well, I want to build a skate park, and I need a name, and I need to start putting money somewhere. So I opened a bank account, I got a DBA. I really don't even know if I did anything right or in order. But then when the skate park kind of fizzled out the first time and I had to put it on hold, I wanted to get back connected with the students, and I thought, okay, well, I don't have I didn't really have any connections with the skaters because they had already graduated at that time, and I didn't have connection with the new skaters, so I thought, okay, what can I do? And I thought, well, I can tutor them because I'm a teacher, and I can give them community service. So that's just kind of how I started that. And then right now we're meeting at Common Grounds. New Covenant lets me use that space for free, and so that's where we meet.
And you've got a van too.
Oh,
Did you-
yeah, we got
did-
a van. That's huge. Yeah, that was huge. So we do pick up students after school on Mondays. Abby's the driver. And I have another volunteer. So we, between the three of us, we have all subjects covered and we can help the students. So when we're doing community service, we meet on Mondays, and then the first Saturday of every month, we do a community service event, so we use the van for that. So the money that we make, some of it goes to the skate park, and then some of it goes to, we always feed the students. We try to give them incentives for passing, and really our overhead is not a lot right now. But we do try to feed them we do actually feed them every time. So most of our money goes to food right now. So that's really about it.
That's awesome.
Thank you for your service, Marissa.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I can appreciate that, and I also want y'all to understand that we're proposing to use a specific type of fund, hotel motel tax. And that has certain requirements that we have to meet.
Yes, and we are aware of that. And so one of the things that we want to do, since we already are doing community service, we are, last month or a few weeks ago, we went to the community gardens. And so the students are, I'm trying to get them to where they're familiar with the area. And I love that the community gardens are down there. I'm hoping to get a plot. So since we're already doing community service, that will just be a natural thing that we will do. We'll help maintain it. And then also some of the funds that we make, it's not going to be a lot because we only do like these little festivals around here. We haven't done anything really big yet, but the extra money, whatever we make, of course, y'all decide what it goes to. We'll just donate it to you guys. But, even if it pays for a bench or a trash can, anything at all, we just want to give something. And I want the students working on it.
Great. Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well,
Anything else, Finley?
I was going to say, Randy, you were talking about once that skate park gets built, there has to be events there to bring in, right?
yes, somebody will have to sponsor events to try to bring people from outside town. I also want to bring up that when we first started talking about this, even at a previous council, we're up here, and we started off at the figure of about 200,000. That was what was bandied around. It's since expanded to 400,000. Now I understand we've gone out RFPs for 300,000, which is closer to what we had originally talked about. But I understand there's been a rise in prices in construction. And one of the big things I've tried to take into consideration is the process of trying to evaluate it now versus when construction costs go back down. And I know this is one of the highest times to build it, and I've been in favor of the project since we started discussing it, but I'm also keeping in the back of my mind budgets that we have. And so I'm trying to balance all that.
Anything else? Finley, did you have anything else to add?
You have a corresponding action item on the regular agenda, and certainly if you have any other questions, please be happy to try to answer those.
Okay. Next item is discussion regarding the base pricing and design for Campbell Park Pavilion.
You have this, Vicki? Again, I apologize. I had handed this off to Chris, and I know he was well prepared to provide this to you. I do want to let you know that we did have, and it's always a great opportunity to sit down with representatives from LAFTA and talk about this project. We did that, about 2 weeks ago or thereabouts, after work, and talked about some of the things that were important. The base price that we came up with was related to a 60 by 80 gable roof structure with a 12-inch eave height and 18-inch ridge height. The cost for that is included in your handout on page 50 and 51. Again, when we also talked about, and I think council's aware that we have talked about previously, the need for storage as well as some sort of room where you could put some roasters or do something like that. I feel like any heavy-duty cooking would probably be done off a pit away from this. But rather than trying to include that structure, in other words, go from a 60 by 80 to a 60 by 100, we felt like the prudent thing to do, and based on input from some of the LAFTA representatives, was let's at least do the pad, do a 20-foot pad, and then we can build on top of that as we perhaps twist a few arms on some trades that could come in and do some of the work, as well as they decide what they'd like to ultimately put with that additional 20 feet. The options that we have included in the overall price, I believe it was $170. Excuse me, yes, the overall, maybe that's on the regular agenda. I believe it was 174, and I'm sure I just got my pages shuffled up. Was inclusive of 2 rainwater catchments on the eaves or on one side of the building. It is our hope that those catchment systems could be utilized by the community garden folks, and I think they're probably excited about having that there, as well as it might be an opportunity, to use that resource without it coming out of a tap. We were given 2 options on the depth of compacted base. We chose to price it as the geotech indicated, which is 4 feet rather than 2. We've gotten some, contractors that seem to suggest that they think 2 feet would be more than adequate, but if our geotech says 4 feet, then I think that's what we price it at, and we get it overbuilt, and hopefully it'll last a little longer. But
So Finley,
Yes.
on the looking at page 51, so those 2 separate costs, it's either going to be the 61 or the 36, and the geotech says it really needs to be the 4 foot, which is the 61. Is that correct?
that's correct.
Okay, so it's not both.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, one or the other. And then we've included the 2 5,000-gallon rainwater collection tanks installed. And I think there was some discussion about, these are big plastic rainwater catchment systems. You could skin them with corrugated steel or something like that, or dress them up a little bit. And as well as there's some discussion about the electricity. We're certainly going to do a pedestal over there in the event that there's somebody needs to use in and around that facility for cooking or other items, but I think eventually we'd also want to probably run a load center and may even run conduit for a load center into that back pad.
What added the rainwater collection system?
Pardon?
Who added the rainwater collection?
That was an option that we had discussed as council, and we had discussed.
I don't remember that. That's why. I don't remember the rainwater. I remember the pavilion and the discussion on it.
Yeah,
And I'm not saying that's a bad deal. I'm just asking a question.
Yeah, I'll look it up, but we did discuss it as council. If council wants to not include that, you can sure pull that out.
Is that the 10,200?
Correct.
I just wondered what they'd proposed to use it for.
Yeah, it'd be primarily, to capture resources that could be used at the community gardens.
That's what it would be for then.
anything else Chris could figure out how to use it for, so.
I guess on those lines, Finley, I think it'd be good to maybe shed some light on, right now, the city provides some water for the community gardens. Is that correct?
I believe so, and
5,000.
Janet, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have an amount that if you exceed, we can.
5,000, yeah.
5,000 gallons a month or total for, or
A month.
annually? A month? And just off kind of the top of your head, I'm sorry, roughly, like, how much would that cost? About 5,000 gallons per month?
5,000 gallons, I need my spreadsheet. Used to have that in my back pocket. Your readiness to serve is going to be 22 plus about $4 a thousand. So it's not a huge number, but it is some savings if they were to reduce the amount of water that's coming out of the tap, absolutely.
And that's kind of what I was trying to get at is, would it be, could we justify spending 10,000 or, 10,200 on that to provide some extra water when we're providing water right now? I mean,
I think the ROI is going to be out there a bit, but the question is this something that we should be doing anyway, trying to reuse that resource? And so I think there was some unique or compelling reasons to do it, other than just saving $30 in water a month or so on. So, but
and then with the geotech saying the 4-foot depth, that didn't have anything to do with actually putting those rainwater catches out there. The weight of those would be off the slab, wouldn't they?
correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Maybe we could put it in a water truck and haul it to the baseball field.
I'd be happy to answer any questions, and again, I apologize. I know Chris was more prepared than I was, but I believe that and certainly folks that were at the meeting might chime in too regarding that. That's what it was, right?
As long as we can get that extra slab into our kitchen and storage unit down the road, we're golden.
Right. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah,
You do have a corresponding item on the regular agenda. Should you?
Okay.
We got a question?
Yes, sir.
I believe that they would be on the west. They'd have to be able to serve the community garden, so they'd need to be on the west.
so, well, never mind.
Anything else? Janet has a question. Janet? We can't hear you.
I have a comment about the water that actually would come off the roof as opposed to using city water. City water has a lot of chemicals in it.
Sure.
And we have found that it has affected our garden in some cases. It's not a big thing, but when you can get rainwater, what a difference. What a difference. I mean, within a day, just having the rain that we had last night, today everything was just popping up. It makes a difference. And I'd really appreciate it if you would consider that rainwater collection.
Thanks,
Do
Janet.
you think it'd be possible that, if the city did bear the brunt of the initial installation fees, over time, there's going to be issues with keeping up with that system as well, during freezes, pipes bust and pumps going out. Is that something that through fundraising that maybe the community garden can help with some of those expenses down the road?
I'm sure, I'm writing grants, among other things. And, definitely if that came, although I had a water collection system where I lived before, we had water brought into us, and we never, ever had a problem. We had a 25,000-gallon tank, and we never had any kind of problem. We were there 20 years, just saying.
And do you think, like, with two 5,000-gallon collection systems, would that cut down on probably the use of some of the city water?
Absolutely, absolutely. We have used less than, we are probably right now at the 5,000 gallon, a little bit over, because we do have now a bill hoping we wouldn't have. But, you know, it's still doable. But that would make it some, well, we'd still have the expense of getting the water to us. You know, you're providing the tanks and the ability for the tanks to be there, but we are still responsible for getting it into the garden, to the garden areas that we are serving.
Okay.
By the way, we have, I'm very proud to say that we have completed our first plot with 21 gardeners, and we're going to our second plot now.
Thank you.
Do we have other comments? Yes, ma'am. Exactly. And their money. Exactly.
Would the pavilion, would it be a controlled pavilion, or could anybody come in and use it? Or is there a reservation type? It's a city pavilion. Okay, so anybody could just show up and have a great time? Okay. Yep.
Just as a side note, the last three people I saw either in the sculpture garden or the nature park, one was from Austin, one was from Dripping Springs, and the other was from Georgetown. So they are coming and they're looking around. They're making themselves aware of what we've got to offer, and we have a lot to offer. Anything else?
To follow up on Councilman Pierce's question, I would envision that this would go under the umbrella of Vicky Tower in terms of reservations as well.
Just to make a reservation through the park.
Yeah, I was just thinking for family reunions and those type things, how you could make a reservation and be able to use it.
Anything else? Finley, are you ready to go on to the implementation of the newly
This is
adopted comprehensive plan?
Yeah, and like I said, Mayor and Council, Mayor Pro Tem, I apologize for taking up your entire workshop, but there were a number of things that we wanted to talk about, primarily post-budget, and one of them certainly was our comprehensive plan and kind of follow up on that. This was, I believe, we discussed this in early August and felt like, let's get the budget out of the way. I think there was some reflection maybe that was desired in time that council could take a look at the comp plan further. So we've got a couple of things that we want you to look at tonight. One, and probably the most important item that we would want council to provide input on is this the right approach, and is this the right format to kind of jump into our comp plan? The comprehensive plan, and Chapter 6 in particular, can be somewhat intimidating. You've got a long list of stuff to do. And it does all relate to findings that our consultants had when they did the public participation process, when they spent time with council, when they spent time with focus groups, when they conducted surveys, et cetera. So all of these items are grounded in some sort of input, feedback, vision that they were able to glean from talking to folks in our community. So we want to see, okay, it's intimidating, it's a long list of items. Is the approach that I'm taking at this particular meeting, where we take a bite out of it at a time over a number of meetings, make sense? Or is this something you want to try to, just kill a bunch of brain cells on, over a half a day or a day-long program? I think it's better to take little bites out of it, but just keep taking them. But anyway, that's one input that we want. And then we also want your input over some of the action steps and kind of, they may seem somewhat arbitrary steps, but I think one of the things that you heard me say along this process was, we may have a goal, but there may be 6 or 10 steps that we would need to do in order to get to that goal. We want to improve entertainment, we want to improve retail opportunities. That's a great goal, but how do you get there? We need the bridge in terms of action on our part and staff's part and council's part and stakeholders' parts to get from there to achieve that goal. So your input on both of those will be important as I go through this. Just, I'll turn it on, Monica, I'm sorry. Just as background, and this is only frankly, the more recent background, but the Planning Commission did conduct their public hearing and approval of the comprehensive plan March 4th. That shipped it up to City Council. City Council did their first reading and public hearing on March 8th of 21. Second reading was done April 12th of 21. At our planning session on July 7th, we talked about implementation timing and felt like it was going to be post-budget at that time. Just as background on what we're looking at primarily Chapter 6, which is the implementation chapter, and it is broken down into 6 elements or 6 kind of broad goal statements, and there's an example of element 1 and element 2 on the next slide. The other thing that again, we had COVID in the middle of a lot of this, but one thing that we did try to do, particularly during basically fall to approval in March, fall of 20, springtime of 21, when it was ultimately approved, is we did meet in small groups. We didn't want to get our whole CPAC together, but we were able to conduct 3 to 4 to 5 person meetings. Hey, what's your impact? What's your insight on the implementation? What needs to come first? What are your priorities? And we align those short-term priorities, the 1 to 2 year terms, based on the conversation we had with them. With the Planning Commission, we also gave them the opportunity, and we also talked to council a number of times regarding review, and I think we provided you copies of all these items. And certainly those of you came on in May, it's like, where did this come from? And how, but there's a fairly strong evidence that this is based on public input through a number of different vehicles. So again, one of the questions we have for you as we jump into, just basically 4 goals is, what do you think about this format and approach? And we'll come back to this. We'll let you provide the answer to that question after we run through it. But it's based on the prioritization in Chapter 6, and there are 3 basic areas: a short, a midterm, and a long-range goals that spread anywhere from 1 to 10 years in terms of when you knock them off. Development per council directive of specific action steps to implement or continue. One of the things I want to make sure you understand is some of the things that we're currently doing go a long way to meeting some of our goals. So we want to make sure that, it's not like we're starting from scratch. We just got to keep doing what we're doing and doing well. It's always your prerogative to adjust the schedule, to define action steps, modify implementation, or modify format. If for some reason you think that we ought to do more bake sales at the library, or more individual specific items as part of achieving some of these goals, please let us know. And we've also, and I've thrown this out a couple of times through our council planning process, but cognizant of other operational policies or planning tools to limit duplication of efforts. So one of the things that we probably don't want to do, if we have a goal statement here that says we need to do more with planning for capital improvements, what we need to do is we need to continue to do our capital improvement program plan. So we don't want to duplicate that, don't have 2 capital plans. We want to just use the one that's kind of tried and true. In the box, you can see those are just the first 2 elements, which are basically what we're going to talk about tonight: growth and community character, and then updating infrastructure and critical services. And moreover, we're only going to talk about those short term. In other words, the things that are at the front of the line is what we want to spend our time on, or at least what I'm proposing that we spend our time on in our format and approach. There are 2 short-term objectives in element 1, and then also in element 2 there too. So we're only going to talk about 4 things, and this may be a lot to digest just getting this right here at this meeting. We may want to come back and look at this again, this almost the same format next meeting as we maybe take off a bite. So one of the things we may do is let's review what your thoughts are on element 1 and 2 short-term objectives, and then let's also do a preview of element 3 and 4 short-term objectives by example. So the 1.1.4 is encourage the development of new retail and entertainment uses that provide residents the services they need without having to leave the city limits. Pretty broad statement. So what are our action statements? And again, these are somewhat arbitrary, and we'd certainly like you to spend some time and look at these, see what else you might add, but take a look at our zoning. Is there anything that we need to do with zoning to encourage those retail and hospitality uses in the highest and best areas for that purpose? Maintain property inventory and contact with real estate developers, property owners, and prospects. And this is a good example of something we're already doing. We want to make sure that we give ourselves credit and say, Mandy's doing a hell of a job on a lot of these items in terms of working with stakeholders, keeping up with property inventory, et cetera. Maybe we'll have some input about different ways to advertise that property. I think we also need to take a look at a lot of these steps about working with our stakeholders. Who has a stake in what we're doing, and how do we provide that synergy to improve or meet those objectives? Review and options for latitude and building codes for older historic renovation. That's something we've talked about. Excuse me. Review retail leakage reports, confer with stakeholders, merchants, and encourage expansion of offerings. And I think the market kind of handles that for us sometimes, but there may be a hidden gem out there that we're not capturing simply because nobody knows that everybody's driving for whatever good or service out of town. And Mayor and Council, I don't know if you'd like me just to roll out all 4 of them, if there are any comments on this particular slide.
I think you and I talked earlier about taking 2 at a workshop and then you told me you've already got this on a PowerPoint. I really think that would work for all of us. I think if we have some suggestions, but 2 at a time on a workshop, and then gives everybody a chance to voice any concerns or ask questions or get their thoughts out. Does anybody else have a?
I would agree with that. I don't want over 2. I don't think we can get through properly. I think what we're starting with right now is an abstract project or product that we have to fill in the blanks on.
Absolutely.
And I've felt that way for a long time on this particular project of comprehensive plan, and I think we need to put a lot of thought into that and deal with it 2 at a time.
We've got 4 tonight, so I'll go through the 4, and then we'll come back at the next meeting and say, what did you think about 4? What other input do you have on these 4? And then we may bite off 2 more new ones at that time. But again, not trying to overwhelm, and certainly give you the opportunity to digest the information and provide us input. The other short-term objective in element 1 or goal 1 was strengthen enforcement incentives throughout the city to maintain the quality of neighborhood character and renovate older structures in disrepair. And there are a number of action steps that frankly have come up over the years that I think we put on our scorecard, and that's what I consider this. This is a checkoff. And I think one of the first things that we would consider is, you know, what are council's code enforcement goals? From a developer standpoint, what are your goals? And let's come up with really what we're trying to get done. And that way, when we go out and knock on doors or we implement a plan, everybody understands that that's the goal that we have for code enforcement and renovation of older structures. I think we need to map it and inventory it so we know what we're talking about. Incentives for commercial upgrades, and that's primarily through the EDC with life safety grants, but council may want to consider some participation in that as well. And I know this is a question that has come up previously, but budget funds for demolition to be utilized after all administrative and criminal remedies are exhausted. Somebody just cannot do it, or if we can't find them and we get an order, we want to be able to move on that. However, we want to make sure that all of our other remedies are exhausted at that point. And I think another great item or opportunity for us was something that Councilmember Pierce brought up is what are some other resources in our community to help with this? You know, we've seen and know of kids in youth groups and church groups that go on a week outing to a particular community, and they go from one house to another house. Either they're painting or cleaning up or landscaping or getting garbage into a dumpster, that sort of thing. And I think Councilman Pierce's opportunity was along those lines is, can we engage a youth group or a church group or some other ways to mitigate and assist homeowners maybe that don't have the means or the capability to clean up their bring their properties into compliance.
Wings of Eagles.
Are they gone? Yeah. Oh, they're...
Along those same lines, we might look to Fort Hood. I know there are some units over there that are interested in this kind of community service.
What about even like the juvenile or adult community supervision groups over there for just, you know, folks that are trying to get community service, maybe helping with some of that cleanup?
Yes, and we've utilized some of those resources in the past. We had a great resource out of Gatesville, but unfortunately with COVID, that's been shut down for over a year, about 2 years. But I think the idea is how can we harness some other resources to assist with this problem, particularly for those individuals that are physically unable to do it or don't have the means to hire someone to do it.
What about a situation like a project that got started and just like quit, like what happened with the Heritage Association and that church? How long?
So what I think,
What are the codes for trying to get someone to? I mean, are there limits or?
I think that comes down to the first bullet point. I think we as a council, or you as a council, need to determine what your code enforcement goals are. Because I think it is important to be as consistent as you possibly can. And where you say, okay, this is a candidate for demolition, but we haven't done anything over here, we need to be focused and be consistent so that we'll draw some of that fire anyway, but I agree with you. You're absolutely correct. But I think that starts with the first bullet point. See, you've done 2 already. Well.
I guess it's more of a comment than it is a question. In the previous page, I was really happy to see the bullet point about examining code enforcement and with an eye toward possibly adopting new codes with an eye toward historic preservation and using the old buildings you've got, especially around the square. I think we really need to seriously consider adopting a historic building code, because there's a big problem now with trying to apply a code written for modern buildings to these old buildings. I know of at least 3 businesses or 3 people that wanted to start businesses either in one of the buildings around the square or within a block of the square, but they were kind of shot down because of the unexpected expense of trying to bring the old buildings into compliance with the modern building code. And a lot of the towns in the area, I think Fredericksburg, San Saba, maybe even Goldthwaite, have adopted these historic building codes that make the utilization of these old buildings a lot more feasible. And I think that's one of the issues with the church that you brought up, is again trying to bring them in compliance with the regular modern building code. And the historic building code, they don't cut corners or sacrifice safety, but they work to achieve the same goals in the context of a historic building, which are built much differently than buildings that are built now, as you probably all are aware. But I just wanted to put in a word for that. I think it's an important thing that we can do for purposes of historic preservation, economic development, bringing people to town, because the history in these historic buildings are some of our biggest assets, and we're not utilizing them now as much as we could. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. I do believe that Frank, our building inspector, does make those exceptions when he is in those older buildings. He does everything that he can to mitigate their expense. So I believe he's aware of that and uses a different set of codes for those.
Yeah, he has the ability to work on historic buildings.
He does.
He does.
Becky, did Frank tell me that you already have that?
We do latitude when it comes to the older buildings. We try to make sure that it's with the intent of the code, and we try to make sure that life safety is important. So there's some things that we can't differ from, but there are some things that we can absolutely make exceptions to.
Right.
Maybe it would be a good future workshop thing to look at some of the codes and see if there's something that we could get in writing so it's not up to some latitude, it's more black and white, so it's more even across the board, like you were saying.
It sounds like we could include that as a workshop item to discuss. Where was it?
I can tell you from experience, that's a hard item to deal with.
Yeah. What was that? Oh, that was under
That first step, I
maintain
believe.
property. Oh, no.
The next.
Zoning regulations. Review options for latitude and building codes for older historic renovations. So I think whether we do that in a workshop or some mechanism so that we all, so that we know what the ability we have to deal with some of those. All right. The first one under Section 2 is improve service and prepare for growth by investing in improvements to the city's water pressure planes. And I think the action steps, we've already somewhat started, but at least I jotted down: implement recommendations of Western Pressure Plane study, implement recommended improvements to Spring Street Pump Station, and then this actually could be a part of the next item as well, but you know, try to assess our ability to serve as well to match up with our capacities and our city's CCN to determine future needs and capacities required. And just a kind of a sidebar on the Western Pressure Plane study, there has been progress. We engaged that study a long time ago. Jason's trying to get done with the pre-treatment first, but he has a number of options. I know that he has been discussing with Van, and as soon as pre-treatment is done, I believe that that'll be done. And certainly we've made some operational changes as well that we think have improved. But
I know the last statement on that, the inventory of undeveloped property should be a high priority for the council outside the city limits in our ETJ.
Oh, yes.
Because it directly affected us on the western elevated storage tank. If that would have been placed, if the engineers would have looked at that for future development, it would have been placed at a different location, which would have opened up a whole lot more area. And the particular engineer we used at the time had nothing but to resolve a problem that we were having within the city. So we need to encourage them to look to the future for us as well.
Jason may, you know, one of the things Jason did say is that the height is actually the appropriate height for that tank, because to go any higher, you would have blown pipes out from the lower elevations of that plane. So,
That I was
right.
talking about.
All right. And then the last item I had, and again, these are only as an example. I fully expect you to come up with, everybody has their assignment of coming up with 2 additional bullet points for each goal statement between now and the next meeting. But develop comprehensive water wastewater master plan to help identify long-term water and wastewater infrastructure needs. And I mean, it spells it out. Do a plan. So what do we have to do a plan? We need to consult with council and any other stakeholders, including staff, developers, develop at least a rough or draft scope of the information you would like this master plan to provide you. Develop an RFQ for procurement of engineering, or in the alternative, you would identify and procure directly with a qualified firm to provide plan deliverables. So this is one of the easier ones where it says you need a master plan. Okay, what is that master plan going to have in it, and how do we procure for that? So what I've provided you is just 4, those are in the first 2 chapters, so that's 1/3 of your goals. You've got 6 elements that have a number of different goals in them. In each one of those chapters, you had 2 short-term objectives. I think the questions for council is, do you like the format, the pace? If we take this every time and do a review of what we did the previous week, plus take a couple of new ones, is that reasonable? We'd certainly want to get your input on modification or amendment to that timeline. There may be some meetings that we're not prepared to take on an additional 2, and then modification or amendment to the goals or goal statements. You may have come up with something on your own or as a council as a whole and said, hey, 4 or 5 out of the 7 of you feel like we need to be doing this as part of this particular element, and we'd certainly want your input on that. But again, it's driven by the community vision that comes up with the plan goals, and then the plan recommendations and the action step and the implementation. When council procured this planning tool, they were very adamant that this was something that wasn't necessarily going to be left on the shelf, that they wanted implemented, that they wanted to be used and referred to, and I think this is one of the first steps in terms of doing that. I'd be interested in your comments and direction on that, and I apologize for going long on the workshop, but we had a number of, I think, important and compelling items to take up tonight.
Anyone want to comment how they feel about these plans going forward with a comprehensive? I think myself that, I think that would work out great for us.
You know, I just appreciate the staff and kind of the work that you guys have done on this, and it's one of those things, we're inspecting, it's taking the time to inspect what we inspect, or inspect what we expect. And,
Correct.
And so it just puts us on a path to keep going down the road and keep moving forward with our plans. And I think it's good.
Anyone else? Thank you, Finley. Do we have a discussion regarding any other item on the regular agenda?
I have one
Okay.
suggestion I'd like to hear back from council. We do have 3 major projects on this particular agenda, and I would ask that in the future that we define a workshop first, one time, and then 2 weeks later, we put the action item on the agenda. In other words, I don't like doing the workshop and then having an action item on it.
I agree with that. I learned from John Cole a good while back on council that you need time to study what's on the workshops, usually.
Anyone else have any comments? With council's approval, I think we'll take a short break, 10-minute break. Could I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, I'm going to call to order the regular session. Chief Bailey.
Please rise and join me in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this beautiful day that you provided for us. Thank you for the weather, for the cool breeze that we've had throughout the day. Father, we ask that you watch over our meeting today and that you guide us and provide us with direction and wisdom. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
I don't believe we have any proclamations or presentations. Under the public hearings, 1.1, citizen comments. Any citizen who desires to address the City Council on a matter not included on the agenda may do so at this time. The City Council may not deliberate on items presented under this agenda item. (1.2) Citizen comments. Any citizen who desires to address the City Council on a matter that is on the agenda may do so at this time. (2.0) Minutes. Discussion and possible action concerning the approval of minutes of the regular meeting held on September 27, 2021.
I didn't see any corrections. Recommend approval.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Consent agenda. 3.1, discussion and possible action regarding purchases and charges in excess of $4,000 from September 1 through September 30, 2021. 3.2, discussion and possible action regarding the August 2021 investment report. Would anyone like to pull either of those items? If not, I'd welcome a motion.
Recommend approval.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We don't have any department reports tonight. We do have Finley's operational report.
Just a few brief comments, Mayor and Council. Pre-treatment, really, we continued with the data gathering process. We hope to finish that up, I believe, this weekend, and that should complete the amount of grab samples that have been requested by our consulting engineer. Additionally, we believe tomorrow representatives from the manufacturer will be on site to conduct jar sampling and jar testing to assess the treatment specification and ability. Additional work related to the site plan will be forthcoming based on data collection and technology specified. We anticipate ongoing reporting to council as progress is made. Work plan, July 7th, and again, this is a leftover from, this is something we pushed off till after budget. We actually had an agenda item, or excuse me, this was in an email update to council where we provided you some dates and opportunities for completing that towards the end of July, and at that time, council directed staff that we wait till after budget to take a look at it. I think it also dovetails with at least a comment, I think a comment or a text the mayor received about wanting to seek some additional focus or direction for the city. And certainly, I think a good jumping off point for that is the council needs and priorities survey that everybody did, and provides us a good opportunity to take a look at what the individual as well as collective priorities for council would be. And so that may be a means to get to that request. CLIPS meeting, we're going to have a big meeting January 13th at 6 p.m. at the middle school. This will be primarily a call to action meeting and a call to get people to sign up for specific committees. Again, the city's focus at this point is going to be related to public safety and utilities. ACM, we've received to date about 24 applications. I've at least tentatively culled that number to 11. I would like to target the first week of November for interviews, and certainly I would like to seek your interest in participating again as as we've done in the past. In wayfinding, I just wanted to note that one of the other budget priorities that was discussed, I believe it was the 8th or the 23rd or the 9th, related to wayfinding, and Becky's done some work on that. We may be able to cut some of those costs based on limiting the design and branding portion of a typical consultant contract to save on some of those costs. But I'd be happy to receive any input you had on the interview process or any other questions related to my report.
Any questions? Thank you, Finley.
Does council still want to participate in that? Give the opportunity, and
Yes.
that's great. We'll certainly set them up in our normal format then.
Thank you. Mayor comments. I did have just one thing. I had a comment today on moving the council back, everyone up to the dais. If I could take a quick vote on anyone's particulars, whether they would be opposed to that, get everyone back so that we're all up here.
I'm all right.
Yes, please.
Next go round, let's move back. Thank you. We have no unfinished business, so on to new business. 7.1, discussion and possible action regarding the award of design and specification contract with Reliance Architect for structural remediation, renovations in addition to the hostess house in an amount not to exceed $130,570.
Mayor and council, the staff's understanding through the workshop session that you would like to defer a decision on this proposal pending a firm design approval from council. Is that correct?
That was my understanding. Does anyone want to contradict that? No. Is anyone prepared to make a motion on this?
I am. Move to table.
Second.
Sure we do.
Do I need a vote on that, or is it, actually,
We
can
don't
it
table,
and
because
just
table would
do
mean
that.
you put it down and come back up the same night. So we will
Just take
defer
no
it.
action on it.
And we'll take no action. We'll
Or
bring it back
action.
up in the next one.
Very good. Thank you, Becky. 7.2, discussion and possible action regarding the award of design-build contract with SPA Skateparks for design and construction of a skate park in Campbell Park.
I move to approve.
Need a second?
Second.
Do we have any comments, questions? I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous. 7.3, discussion and possible action regarding base pricing and design with options for Campbell Park Pavilion in amount not to exceed $175,885,000.
Move to approve.
Second.
Any comments, questions?
I have a question, because originally it was going to be 200,000. And so is there any way that we could, leave it at 200 just in case with building costs and all that stuff?
I don't have an objection to amending my motion.
I'll go along with that.
I think that would require an amendment to the motion,
I would amend
not to exceed.
not to exceed $200,000.
Second.
So I have a motion and an amendment not to exceed $200,000 for the pricing and design with options for Campbell Park Pavilion.
I got a little, one of the things we talked about earlier, we can discuss now, is that correct?
Yeah.
That's what I figured, that's what I was talking. Okay, just wanted to make sure. As cool as I think that rainwater catch is, it's one thing that we're already providing water for that garden. And one of the things I think that could be potentially more important for this structure out there from talking with stakeholders is having, maybe a little kitchen area in there, not a place to prepare food, but basically a caterer's kitchen and having storage in there. Just don't want the same situation of like the golf course pavilion where not many folks are potentially using it. And I guess I just have some trepidation about that. I think rainwater catch is a great idea. I just didn't know if maybe those funds could be used in a different manner, but I don't know, y'all. I'd like to hear more kind of what folks think about that.
I'm not sure what I heard you say, Zach. You're wanting to revise this and bring it back another day? We've already amended it once.
Well, I just wanted to hear my fellow council members' thoughts on the rainwater catch system compared to spending money on potentially improvements to the structure to be able to make it a little bit more broad use-wise for other city events.
Basically, what you're doing is kind of putting an outdoor kitchen in that pavilion, is that correct?
I'd be concerned about damage to it because we don't have, that's just more that we've got the police. I think if they're going to cater a project, that caterer will bring what they need to that particular area. That's my feelings on it. I also feel like that even though I don't remember us discussing a rainwater system, it could have slipped my mind, but I believe that is certainly an area that the city needs to start participating in some kind of conservation effort.
Mayor and Council, your current motion is for an amount not to exceed.
200,000.
Correct. If we could also discuss this with the contractor, see if maybe we do one and then have a little bit extra funds for a more of a build out or at least a start. So I guess what I'm saying is keep the dollar amount the same in your motion, and maybe we fine tune some of the specifics of the design, if that's okay, and we'll bring it back to you at the next meeting. And if it makes sense or if people change their mind, we can certainly do that. But we do want to get started with, I think, in as much as council feels comfortable with the procurement end of it.
Yeah, my motion stands.
So I think I understand that I have a motion for not to exceed 200,000, and that is the extent of the motion. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Correct.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Unanimous. 7.4, discussion and possible action regarding the RFP for the airport terminal improvements.
Back up, Finley.
I'm Chris Iker again. This is a result of the September 27th discussion with the Airport Advisory Committee, and I think Robert Langford probably said it pretty well, is that, you know, we need a starting point, and the starting point as far as he was concerned, and I think everybody, or most folks also agreed, was a terminal area plan or a plan of the airport that would identify existing buildings, where we could relocate new buildings, what sort of taxiway might be necessary. And as Ben Breck indicated, that is something that is reimbursable through the non-entitlement fund allocation. And we would just seek your blessing or approval to develop and publish an RFP. It doesn't mean that we would have to do anything other than develop the RFP, and then also a letter of intention to TxDOT for that purpose and the use of the funds for that purpose.
So moved.
Second.
I have a question, and this is strictly for the sort of a master plan or a layout,
It's a layout, it's a site plan, yes.
just a site plan of proposed improvement.
Future land use kind of
Okay.
plan is
Thank
basically
you.
what we're looking at.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous. 7.5, discussion and possible action regarding the award of a contract for utility line trimming to LCRA and McCoy Tree Surgery in an amount not to exceed $150,000.
Mayor and council, we've done this every year. This project has worked great through these years. Even through these storms, I know that y'all can tell, we have very little to do with the outages because of the trees that are falling on. If they are, then they're a pretty good ways from the line. And of course, you can't stop them all. But,
Move to approve.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Appreciate it.
Unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you, Flint.
Take care, all right?
7.6, discussion and possible action regarding appointment of board members to the Construction Board of Adjustment and Appeal.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. The next few items will be mine for board appointments. One thing I do want to kind of bring up first is there are several that I'm going to reappoint, and then there's some that I'm not going to do anything, take action on for a few weeks while we have board meetings, because we have some new appointments that we need to consider. So this is just going to be the first part of it.
Okay.
So in the first one is just to, we want to reappoint Ron Farr and Richard Proctor, whom have agreed to serve another term. And then we want to appoint Aaron Sanders to replace Johnny Sanders on my Construction Board of Adjustments.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? 7.7.
This item is to reappoint all of my members on the CIP committee. They will all be the same. I'm going to reappoint them all. Just Chuck Williamson, Donnell Rathman, Shirley Blake, Gail Long, Bob McCauley, Diane Hodges, and Neil Lovell.
Need a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? 7.8, members to the Planning and Zoning Commission?
Yes, ma'am. We want to reappoint James Skinner, Dorothy Person, and Marissa Canellis on this team, on this board, who have agreed for another term. Also, I want to bring it to your attention that I do have 2 vacancies on this board, so this is one of the boards I'll be bringing back to you to appoint new members.
Recommend approval.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? 7.9, Zoning Board of Adjustments.
This item, we'd like to reappoint Charlie Kennington, Bob Corin, Lori Henderson, and Dan Shepard, who have all agreed to serve another term.
So move.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous. Airport Zoning Board of Adjustments.
On this item, we'd like to reappoint Gordon Thornton, Ron Jose, whom agreed to serve another term.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? 7.11, this is reappointment of board members to Parks and Advisory Board.
Yes, we would like to reappoint Robin Gradell, Shane Jones, and Tasha Bates, whom agreed to serve another term. Also on this board, I will bring back to you because I do have one vacancy that we'll have to appoint a new member as well.
So moved.
I heard a motion. Did I hear a second?
I got them both.
You got it? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you very
Becky.
much.
We're going to adjourn into an executive session. We're going to receive and evaluate financial information received from a business prospect, to discuss same and/or to deliberate regarding a commercial or financial information that the city has received from a business prospect that the city seeks to have locate, stay, or expand in or near the city, with which the city is conducting economic development negotiations, and/or to deliberate on any other financial or other incentives to any business prospect described above. I can't talk tonight. If I could get a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn to executive session.
Second.
Let's go.